Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the You Can Be Both podcast, a podcast where we remind you that you can be both LGBTQ and a person of faith. I'm your host, Lauren Lanzaretta. So before we dive in, just a quick reminder. If this podcast has meant something to you, please make sure you're subscribed. Like this episode and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribing helps you never miss an episode, and it helps push this message out to people who might feel alone right now. Also, I've created the LGBTQ Healing and Resource Guide. It includes my full testimony and every book, podcast, and creator that has helped me get to where I am today, confident in who I am and rooted in my relationship with God. If you're looking for practical resources and support, that link is below. Now, as many of you know, I'm also a musician. I process a lot of my story through songwriting, so you can find my music on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, if you just search for Lauren Lanzaretta. All right, so let's get into the episode. So on today's podcast, I have someone that I have been obsessed with her content. Her name is Ciarra Jones, and she is a graduate of Harvard, intellectual, can talk about any topic. She's on IG as the Gardening Theologian. And Ciarra Jones is a writer, speaker, and public theologian known as the Gardening Theologian, blending theology, storytelling, and wisdom of the natural world. She helps people untangle inherited beliefs and cultivate faith that's rooted, liberated, and alive. Through her speaking and writing, Ciarra invites communities to explore how tending soil can mirror lending spirit, shedding systems of control, embracing new growth, and nurturing collective healing. A graduate of Harvard Divinity School, she weaves theological insight with practical wisdom to help people reimagine faith for our changing world. Ciarra has over 140,000 followers across Instagram and TikTok and is signed to Levine Greenberg Roston Literary Agency. All right, let's welcome Ciarra Jones. Welcome to You Can Be Both. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm honored to be here.
I have been literally obsessed with your content. I think I saw a post just you talking about, I think it was like an ex-gay post or something, and you were talking about the topic, and I was just like, locked in. So ever since then, I've been following you, and I'm so excited we finally get to chat because there's so much to talk about.
Yes, I'm so excited to be on your pod. When you emailed me and you were like, what can we talk about? I sent like 20 topics. So
Nice.
I apologize for not having one idea there.
No, I do want to run some of those, I really do want to just dive into different topics and kind of get your thoughts on a bunch of different ones, just kind of pick from, you know what I mean?
Yes, that's my favorite way to do it too.
But before we do that, so I know that you have a degree from Harvard in theology and you have your own business. It's a consulting business and you're also into gardening and all this stuff. I read your bio, but we want to know what your story is. Give us a little background on who you are, why you're so smart, why, what drives you, what your passion is, what your childhood was like, kind of bring us up to today and what drives the passion behind what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for that really thoughtful question and for having me. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
It's truly an honor. I think your pod is amazing. And, it's such a gift to be here and to chat about all of the things.
Yeah.
And I love that you asked about personal story because all of my work in academia is around my own personal story. And whenever I talk to burgeoning master's or PhD students and they ask me about applications, and they ask me what question they should ask or explore in their applications, I always say they should ask a question about exploring the things that had caged them and exploring the things that free them. And I think for me, my academic journey was the same. So I grew up in Sacramento, California, Elk Grove, California, actually. If people are from Sacramento, they're not going to like that I said I'm from Sacramento when I'm from Elk Grove. So let me say Elk Grove, California, which is a suburb of Sacramento. But before that, actually, so my dad is a surgeon. And so before my family moved to Elk Grove, we actually grew up in a lot of rural white Northern California. So I lived in Oroville, I lived in Grass Valley, I lived in Nevada City. And so the first 7 years of my life, I lived in all white towns, which is a really
Mm,
interesting experience. Just being, I think one people don't realize, as like I was born in 1993, so I think it's hard for folks to understand that in 2000, like, yes, like there are all white towns here in California. I think that we forget that, and my family lived in those
right.
segregated areas, and my dad was in private surgical practice, so that's what led him into these communities. And it was interesting just seeing the racial dynamics of having a black father who was often one of the one of the highest educated members of the white communities we were in, and still seeing the systemic racism that our family
Mm,
experienced. And it was kind of it was interesting. So I've had this really interesting experience as a black person who did grow up middle class, upper middle class, with a highly educated family, and also still seeing how that does not protect you from systemic racism. In many ways, my family has a lot of the things that white folks say black Americans need to have to get this respect we deserve, and like we still didn't always get it systemically. It's just something that I think about. But
yeah.
when my around 7, my parents got divorced and we moved to Elk Grove. I highlight the divorce, which is something I've actually been exploring a bit in I'm working on my first book project, my first book proposal
Oh,
with my
nice.
literary agent around family and gardening. And it really was my parents' divorce that I think like sent my mom into the church, which is something I've been thinking about, which is like
Mm,
my mom got divorced around 2000. Like people were not getting, we weren't quite in the divorce boom. That's
mm-hmm,
what I would call it. Like
mm-hmm.
I feel like she beat out a lot of other millennial families around having a divorce. So when we moved to Elk Grove, I think we stuck out, I feel like we stuck out as a sore thumb having with a single black mother and 3 children. I felt some stigma. And it was interesting seeing the stigma go from like having married parents to like divorced parents. There is such a stigma of single black mothers and their work. But a big reason we got into the Assemblies of God Church was I think my parents' divorce, and because my mom was so brave, I feel like in leaving an unhappy marriage before that was really the social norm for women. It also meant that society really shamed her for that choice. Like my mom left a well-to-do black surgeon. I think there was a lot of judgment about why would a woman do that. But I'm really proud of her because I think there were aspects of that marriage that were not enough for her. And shout out to my mom too. My parents both met at Berkeley. You know, she has her master's as well in biology and in teaching, so she's a badass too. Okay, and then my brother and sister also went to Cal, but. That's all to say. Grew up Assemblies of God in this post divorce to my parents, and I think I really went into the church maybe for my mother's approval. Like as she went deeper into the church, I went into the church too because that was the language of how to engage with my mother. And I think if a lot of children, if we go back, we'll see that we maybe went deep into fundamentalist Christianity because our family system required it for our own acceptance. Like I think I felt like, okay, my mom loves God and I want to love God in this way. And it was very intense and just an intense way to live. When I was around 16 or 17, I realized I was queer and I did not share that with anyone. I realized kind of in a traumatic way. My high school was pretty conservative. So Elk Grove, when I was growing up in the early 2000s, was having a religious revival, which a lot of folks don't talk about. Like early 2000s, there was a teen religious revival. So Elk Grove, California, throughout all the public school systems, like pastors and preachers were coming through. Like my high school was 2,000 students, and our Christian club was 500 kids at some point. Like that's a lot for a public high school, a fourth of your public high school being in
Yeah.
these Christian spaces. So anyway, I growing up in this community and wanting to be accepted of my mother, and also being in a very Christian school, but also being queer was very overwhelming. And when I got to UC Berkeley, I remember telling my church, like, I think I'm gonna go explore myself more in college. And they told me, like, if you go to Berkeley, like you're gonna fall into sin. Like if you go into higher education, you're gonna fall into sin. You're going to fall away from faith. You're going to fall away from all of your fundamentalist upbringing. And to be honest, I did. But it wasn't because I'm some like heretical person. Although if people think I'm heretical, I accept that. I'm cool with that. It was just because my theology could not withstand critical inquiry. And so
Mm.
when I was in higher education, all of a sudden I had to think about like my church literally said hip hop is demonic. Does that hold up to like what I'm learning in my African American studies classes? No. Like my church said women should not preach and teach. Does that hold up to what I'm learning in my gender and sexuality classes about women and their leadership prowess and women and how they have broken barriers and blazed trails? And no. Eh, But the biggest area that really set me free from like my theological ideas and constructs that caged me was I fell in love with my college roommate my
Mm.
freshman year, which is very cliche. And I had really been, within compulsory heterosexuality my whole life. Like I grew up dating boys, I had boyfriends in high school and stuff. And as I mentioned, I did have one female lesbian crush in high school. I had a best friend, and there was just a lot of jealousy in that relationship. And one day we were all hanging out with my basketball team. We all were on the basketball team. And like there was a way that we touched each other that I guess just seemed intimate to others that we didn't really clock. Like I think we had like held hands or we had like hugged in a way that was
Hmm.
intimate to one of my teammates. And it like started this rumor on campus that I was queer. And that was really difficult to me around 16 or 17, being in a pretty queer phobic environment in a queer phobic home. And at the time, like all my mom's advice was like, oh, like if you just date a boy, like people will not think about this or this will kind of go away. Like it wasn't really talked about in my home. It was just like, here's a pathway for it to go away. And so when I mentioned like my queerness did come up when I was a teenager, that was that moment, but it was quickly repressed down because no one really reached into me to say like, "Are you queer?" I just feel like I got a lot of social advice about how to make this misunderstanding go away, this
Right.
misconception of my identity. But it wasn't until I was in college and I had a roommate who I was in love with, who I would see every night and be with every night and be around every night. Not sexually, that was not somewhere that we went with each other, but
Mm.
I think just having to confront her every day meant having to look at the part of myself I was told God didn't love and didn't like. And also loving her every day made me confront that too, because I loved the thing in her that I was told to hate in myself. I loved her queerness and I loved her sexuality and I loved who she was. So I know that was a long winded, but that's about me, which is growing up in this Black, highly educated family. Who I think, like many Black families, dealt with racism and the intensity of respectability politics. And I think had a Black mother who was searching for her place in a society that didn't create a lot of space for single Black mothers. And I think that led my family deep into fundamentalist theology. But it was falling in love with a queer person that made me ask, is God here too? And I think what's been so cool is that has liberated me from a restrictive God. But what's been awesome is it's liberated my mother too, because as I've
Really?
gone into progressive theology, like she completely left the conservative church. Like we have grown in
Really?
this space together. So from her, I've seen the power of bidirectional transformation and liberation too.
Wow. That's amazing. So, do you think that I know you said like when you started educating yourself, like things weren't quite adding up. How do we get on the same page like with the church? The church is very
Mm,
anti-gay. It's very hard to break through this in like teaching people like the correct biblical translations and what like God's nature and like all
mm,
these different things. Like, what is it going to take for the church to change its mind? Is it education?
mm. That's a good question. And I love that you asked me to start with my story because in my story, the things that broke a lot of toxic theology was relationship. It's my
Mm.
first crush in high school, and I have to confront this question of queerness. It's my mother having to ask herself, will I stay in fundamentalist theology or not have a relationship with my child? And I think when I grew up Assemblies of God, the biggest thing you're taught is if you're talking with a non-Christian, like your goal is conversion, or you're always wanting to convert other people. You're not learning to connect across lines of identity. So one, I would say again, like my Christian theology fell apart in college because I was given new information, which meant a lot of my theology could not withstand critical inquiry, but also I had new relationships. So I think one, for a lot of Christians, the breaking of these toxic theological constructs start with relationships, start with making friends with a Buddhist person when you've been told that Buddhist ideology is bad,
Right.
being friends with a Muslim person when you've been told that Islam is demonic or bad, being friends with a Jewish person and learning about how they think about the Torah and how they think about God. I think it does first start with believing that other communities have something of value to say about God. And I'll get to education too, but I want to pause there and just see if you have any thoughts on that, or
Yeah.
reflections too, because for me, I think education is secondary to the relationship
Mm.
building, actually.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. The education part and breaking out of like, so we're all raised, a lot of my audience, right? We're raised evangelical or in like a Christian conservative environment
Mm,
where there is this truth that is being taught, right? Like this is the truth. And if you stray away from this, that's why they don't, I mean, I was taught in my church, I went to Calvary Chapel, that education is bad.
Yeah.
You don't want to go to a liberal college because that will, that will send you off into all these different evil things. So I was never encouraged to go to college. And,
Mm.
I don't know. I just feel like, is it the truth? How do you I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like,
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
what is the truth? Like, how do we
Yeah,
know what the
yeah.
truth is? Like, you went to school for
Ooh.
theological stuff, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
did they teach the truth? And then what is like the Christian church teaching the truth? And where are we getting all this information? And how do we
Oof.
compare it to one another? Like, what are we teaching here? What is the truth?
Yeah. Okay, Lauren,
So,
first of all, you ate that question up. I love that question of what is truth. And that's such a good question. So when I was at Berkeley, I learned the word ontology, which is like the study of being or the study of truth. And I remember I had this class, this poli sci class, and my professor kept saying, this is ontologically true. And then I said, like, one day I was like, sir, what does this mean? And he's like, it just means true, true. He's like, it means it's extra true. And so the study of ontology is like, what is true for real?
okay.
And the ontology changes based on our identity, which is hard. So let me say a few things. So
Okay.
when I was at Cal, as I mentioned, I fell in love with my roommate, which was helpful. But I remember going to one of my professors and kind of confessing myself. I could tell they were visually queer. Okay, when you're first gay, you're desperate, y'all. Okay, you're just like, I need another gay person.
I know.
I need to talk to a gay person. And I was so lucky that my college TA, one of them was gay. So I asked for a coffee and I'm like, I'm gay. And I grew up conservative and I have nowhere. Basically, I said, like, I don't think that God hates my queerness, but I have nothing to corroborate that.
Mm,
It's just a feeling. And it makes me feel like my church told me I'm making up this God that loves me. And
mm,
it was so amazing to learn. There was a whole scholastic field of study called liberation theology. So there's queer theology in that, how queer people define God. There's womanist theology in that, how Black women define God. There's mujerista theology, how Latina people define God.
mm,
It's this huge, beautiful garden tapestry of how multiple marginalized communities are defining God. And in the book that I'm working on, like a lot of it is going to explore the process of defining God as a garden versus a central truth, in the sense of like, I might define God in a way, but if it doesn't include any concept of how Lauren thinks about God, like I am
mm,
missing a component of God. And so I don't think we're moving towards one theological truth. Father Gregory Boyle says in his work, Tattoos on the Heart, that we want to expand the definition of God so far that no one lives outside of it. And to me, that means we are always in this evolving conversation of who God is. Now, I want to say one thing before I pause, which is when fundamentalist Christians hear me say that, they hear a lawless God without rules. Like fundamentalist Christianity has created a stagnant God that does not grow or change because they think at least we can create laws and practices around this God. If God always hates lying, then that's a clear God. If God always hates sex, that's a clear God. What I'm saying is more the definitions of God change as we see that certain people are being harmed in that definition. So, for
mm,
example, if we think about celibacy, when we say God always hates sex, then that has meant that when we have a culture where people, and I want to give a trigger warning of mentioning a sexual assault, but when we have a culture that we say God always hates sex, then we think about Sodom and Gomorrah and we say queerness is bad. We don't say rape is happening here in this passage, and that is what God hates. That definition is so narrow, we actually can't explore what's happening within sexuality and nuance or whatever it is. So
right.
what I say is God always moves us towards a deepened appreciation of human dignity. And that might mean we are always still examining and expanding how we define God. And so I know that that's not a clean answer, but I'm okay with that because I think the work of defining God is messy. I don't think we're
Mm,
moving towards a central truth. I think we're
mm.
moving towards an expanded truth that includes more voices around who can define God than we have in the past.
Yeah, that's so true. And I completely know what you're talking about. It's an
Okay, I hope that makes
evolution,
sense.
right?
Yeah.
It's like
Okay. Yeah.
becoming conscious. It's becoming conscious of the things we're not aware of, the experiences and perspectives of others, and their experience in life, right? And
Yeah.
that does dramatically open you up to who God is. I often say like we're all made in God's image, right? And God has made all of us like different cultures, different colors, different like ways of like worshiping. And, I feel like the white culture thinks their way is like, this is the way God wants it. We're only going to
Mm,
sing hymns, and
mm.
they think other things are weird or whatever. But like, if we are all truly made in God's image, but you don't know or appreciate that culture or get to know, you truly don't know God,
Mm.
because we are all God. And unless you open yourself up to these different perspectives and experiences, you can't know God fully, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the color purple, Alice Walker says, like, we don't find God in church, we share God in church.
Mm,
And I love that phraseology. And again, I think it doesn't mean something I'm sensitive to when I work with deconstructing Christians is for a lot of folks, like what also makes them feel safe in church is ritual. It is taking the Eucharist. It is, eating the bread. It is drinking the wine. Particularly for my Anglican colleagues, it's also for having like the ritual Catholic service, which is why a lot of folks become Episcopalians, which are like inclusive Catholics, is how I see Episcopalians.
hmm
And so I say that to say, like, I just want audiences to know there is a place to go to have defined practice around your Christian theology, whether it's United Church of Christ or the Unitarian Universalist or Episcopalians, as I mentioned, or here in California, Presbyterian USA. Like, you can definitely go to churches who have really great praxis and values around Christian ethics. And again, I name that because the biggest comment I get is like, if we say anyone can define God, then God is just loosely defined, that there is no structure around God. But what I see it is under giving us a springboard to define a God that is more expansive. Like
mm,
when I think about a Christian nationalist God or a white fundamentalist God, I think about a God who was so concerned with us being obedient and in this like very narrow idea of what is right behavior that we miss out on human joy and connection.
mm,
Like also in the color purple, Alice Walker says like God is trying to please us back. And I think that is what I think about a lot when I think about a garden theology, which is what I'm putting forward, a theology where we have a collective space to define God, but also gardens. We think about flowers like it's about us marveling at their beauty, but it's also about us experiencing reverence and awe and
mm,
being received as good. And something I talk about in my work is I love using gardens as a metaphor for God because in gardens, everyone is worthy. Anyone can come into my garden and be a gardener. Anyone can come into my garden and add value. And I think it's the same for understanding of God. Anyone can add value to that conversation. And I think we are getting closer to theological truth when we are defining God as inclusive as possible.
mm.
Now, inclusive does not mean I'm saying there is license to harm or hurt. Inclusive means, are we defining God in a way that brings us closer to valuing the human dignity of all? And I think if we're doing that work, we're getting close to whatever truth might be.
That is so
Yeah.
true. It is. It's like, and a lot of Christians, and I hear this all the time, right? In my comments, the thing I get the most is like, well, Christians aren't showing hate; they're just telling you the truth.
Oh, let's talk
Okay,
about that.
let's talk about that,
Yeah,
because
that's a
time and time
great.
again, they are telling me being gay is, lustful, and it's a desire of the flesh, and you're automatically just a sinner if you're gay, and they are
Yep.
here to tell you the truth, and they are commanded to tell you the truth, and they are on Jesus' side just trying to like save you from hell. But why, like, what is the truth for you to tell me? Because I could cherry pick so many. You name it. You give me any person, put them in front of me. I will pick out verses to form an argument that you're
Mm,
going to hell and that you're not going to hell. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
there is something for everybody. So, what makes you more, qualified to tell me that I need to change when you're a sinner yourself?
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Oh, there's so much here. I think so many things here to that we can talk about. I think one is something that I talk about in my work, and I lecture every year at UC Berkeley School of Policy on race, religion, and public policy
mm,
because a lot of our policy students have to work with religious communities to move policy forward. And something I say is the stakes of religious communities are not systemic inequality on earth, they are heaven and hell, systems of power and punishment beyond earth. That is what they are considering. And so that
mm,
does mean that a Christians are taught to believe, or some are taught to believe, they are doing a mercy to a queer or trans person when they say, for example, you're living in sin, even if that dehumanizes that person on earth because they're saving their soul for heaven. And so I think one, we've created these theologies that are deeply divorced from empathy, that are so disembodied because we said actually to have empathy for Lauren or to have empathy for Ciarra is to co-sign their trip to hell, is to set them up for eternal damnation. So to
Right.
save them, I will hurt them now. I will cause suffering now so they don't suffer later. And I think that that's a very twisted theology. Something that Peter, or that Jesus says to Peter, I think it's in Matthew 6 or 13, I forget. But Jesus asked Peter, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah, you are Jesus. And something I love is Jesus says, yes, you're right, Peter. And whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven, but whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven. And a Black theology, a queer womanist theology, is rooted in our corporeal experience now, our human bodies now. White supremacist and fundamentalist theology, because it allows white folks to obfuscate accountability for systemic inequality, are divorced from the body. Because they say suffering is individual. If Ciarra is suffering and other Black people are suffering, it's because they're not working hard enough in a world that already has created all the opportunity for them, right? God becomes the great equalizer. But and that's within a white fundamentalist context. Within a Black theology context, we see ourselves as the hands and feet of justice. We cannot separate suffering on earth from suffering in heaven. We cannot separate suffering on earth from a spiritual call to create human dignity now. And I think what's so great about what Jesus says to Peter, it's almost, I feel like, this warning of, you think death is escapism from systemic inequality. But if you don't rectify it here, you'll experience it in the afterlife. It'll come with you. And so I think I see God as calling us to see that the most urgent call is human dignity now. The most urgent call of our Christianity is human dignity now. But I think fundamentalist Christianity says it is heaven and hell. And I think that has a lot to do with white folks wanting to not have to be accountable to systemic harm and do the work of addressing that harm. And it really is a white construct of heaven, because only white
Wow.
folks then are escaping suffering. No one else is in that theological notion or idea. And the other thing I'll say that we do that's really harmful to Christians, that I think means that even bigoted people who seem bigoted are suffering too, is we have intertwined salvation. So something that happens for parents of queer people, for example, maybe a child comes to them and says, I am gay. And in their heart of hearts, that parent actually does want to accept their gay child. And their pastor told them, if you accept your gay child, you're going to hell too. And so we've intertwined damnation, and we've actually de-incentivized people from empathy, because we've told them, not only will your child suffer if you empathize, you will too. And so we've kind of can I cuss?
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta mind fuck people. We've made them afraid that becoming more inclusive is harmful. So let me pause there, because I think it's those two things, which is the the whiteness, circumventing accountability through whiteness, and
Okay.
that kind of concept of heaven, and this intertwining of damnation that makes Christians afraid to change their mind, because they're told, if I change my mind, I have lost my spiritual status. And that's a crappy thing we've done to people, as well.
That is so interesting. Like, first off, like the perspective, the difference of like Black Christians and the way Black people in general see that perspective. Like, I definitely want to hear more about that. It's so
Yeah, let's talk about
interesting
it.
because, you know, I wrote a song called Heaven on Earth, and really it's about like exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people, a lot of Christians are so focused on the next life, and they think that they could just treat anybody however they want on this in this life and like other people. So they almost become like the moral police.
Yep.
Well, in order to stay, good with God, I need to just keep pointing out everybody's flaws because I don't agree with that. God wouldn't agree with that. And my heart needs to be God. I need to hate what God hates
Yes.
instead of loving. Like, I really think the true test, right, is to become like Jesus and evolve. And that's when I believe the Bible says, renew your mind,
Mm.
is becoming Christ-like so much that your love is so radical, so that no matter the difference or what anyone's doing, you love them so purely the way that God loves them. And
Mm.
that is an unending, unconditional, radical love, like Jesus loved people.
Yes.
not, and what I see now is people acting more like the Sadducees and Pharisees, pointing fingers. Well, that's not what the law says. You're not obeying the law. So we're doing the right thing by putting that boundary there and saying, you're not welcome anymore because
Mm,
we are in a
mm.
holy place. And I see it time and time again, LGBTQ people getting kicked out of church because they're gay, and trans people, if they don't change the way they look, they're going to get kicked out. You're kicking people out of a place that is meant for healing and love and acceptance and radical love when you are a sinner
Oh,
too.
come on
What
now.
kind of crazy, whatever, I don't even know if it's theology. What kind of crazy even thinking is that?
Yeah.
The church has lost its mind. It is completely
Sorry, it's really funny.
backwards.
It's true. It
We
has
are to
lost its
be
mind.
love radically like Jesus, not become this moral police who are kicking people out of the church. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm.
I could go
Oh,
on.
no, my gosh, Lauren. You have the best questions. Oh my gosh. Like, and just have the best insights and weave things together so well. Because it's absolutely right. Like, I think, a lot of public theologians say this, but I think it's true that we live in a society that wouldn't recognize Jesus if Jesus came back
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
And in the New Testament, they didn't recognize Jesus. Jesus, like, what does Jesus say? Like a prophet is not accepted in their hometown. They are
Mm-hmm.
not often seen by their own society or their own culture, particularly those most intimately close to them.
Right.
When Jesus says that, I often think about queer and trans folks actually, because oftentimes queer and trans folks are told from their family system, I know you, and that is how I know you are not
Mm.
queer and trans. But
Mm.
actually, that assumption, I actually had one of my good friends, Colton Barnaby, on my podcast. And something he says is like I think he said, well, there's a philosophy that says when we know something we cease to believe it, or we believe something we cease to know it. I think it's when we believe something we cease to know it. Like when we have stagnated something so much and said it is one thing, we
Mm.
actually cease to know it. And we see that in Jesus's own experience, how much he was wrongly defined, how much he was misperceived. And so I do think we're a society that would not know God if God came back.
Right.
But I also think we have to see that our accountability structures in the church, they protect someone's power. Like when we think about, I always ask people the question, who benefits from this definition of God being unchanging? Because someone benefits from it.
Mm.
We really only need the definition of something to be unchanging if some kind of power is being protected by its stagnation. Because when we look at natural systems, everything changes. One reason that I started doing gardening and garden theology and seeing God, using nature as a prism through which you understand God more, is my favorite thing about gardens is they die. Gardens do not exist in perpetuity, they must die. And I think our theological concepts are the same. Like
Wow.
if we think about slave master theology, like slave master theology was a foundational theology that founded the United States. It was founded upon the idea that Black people are cursed descendants of Ham, which is Noah's son in the Bible, and the most Black people can ever hope for is being you having our bodies broken as labor under capitalism. That was a theological idea. That idea has mostly, or hopefully, I mean, we see remnants of it, of course, in Christian nationalism,
Yeah.
but in its most insidious form has died. Like we allowed that theological death because we said, actually, God is not within that framework. And so when I think about, people acting as Pharisees and Sadducees, the biggest reasons folks become that is because they are welded to their own power within these theological ideas. One reason I kind of bristle sometimes at the question of truth, and I'll say even my progressive theology friends don't all agree with me on this. Like,
Okay.
I'll put out content sometimes where I'm like, I this fundamentalist idea of God sucks, and I'll have some progressive friends comment, and they'll be like, yeah, but they don't have the true God, and we have the true God. And the reason I get nervous about even me saying I'm putting forward a true God is I don't want God to stop with this definition. Because what if, Lauren, one day this definition of God is too small?
Mm.
What if gender becomes more expansive, or race or whatever becomes more expansive, and we have new identities in our society? And in my work, I haven't considered this identity group yet, or this community yet. That I want my definition of God to die. And I want us to then re evolve it. I want us to be invested in this project of never stopping. So I myself in my work have a lot of hesitancy around claiming truth, but when you
Mm.
bring out this really important idea of why do we act like Pharisees and Sadducees? Why do we uphold religious laws and practices that are harming? I think it's because we're welded to our power in that system, and
Mm.
we haven't released it yet.
Mm. Okay. So how does that, let's go back to like the Black experience in the
Hmm.
church
Hmm.
and how that all, because I know like there's a lot of homophobia in the church, right?
Yeah,
But talk a
there can
little bit
be.
about how like is the LGBTQ rights like the new civil rights movement? Is that
Yeah.
like, if you are, because 60 years ago, they, Christians justified, segregation, and they didn't want interracial marriage, and there was all these different things.
Oh yeah.
Um, and now they're saying the same thing about gay people. So like talk a little bit, like educate us on what you know about that and how like homophobia in the church and how it all relates, I guess.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And something I like to always highlight is, you know, a lot of my work and research has led me into the Black church, and I grew up in the white church. So
Mm,
I'd say my deeper experience is in the white fundamentalist church, and my deeper scholastic experience is in the Black church, which is so interesting. So I'll speak a
okay.
bit to both. I think one, I like to always highlight that homosexuality wasn't translated into biblical text until 1946. And so
Right.
I think we have to remember that that word was translated into it. And there are 7 passages that are utilized to dehumanize queer people through biblical text, and they're called the clobber passages. And actually, about 2 years ago, I was at a conference at Spelman, and I watched 7 Black pastors re-preach those passages through a queer inclusive lens, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And one of
Wow.
them was Christian Smith, who your audience likely knows, and something he said is queerness is not violence, and violence is not queerness. Like, and what God has wanted us to understand throughout biblical text is the the humanization and denigration of sexual violence, and to see our sexual bodies as worthy, not to see queerness as unworthy. And
Mm,
I gained that from Black pastors. And so I name that to say the Black church, if we look at the history, has always been this really beautiful sight. I mean, the Black church really becomes birthed out within the US context as opposition to slave master theology. And something I say all the time is, yes, part of Black theology is an appeal to God, all right, as a site of liberation for Black folks. But I always said the ingenuity of Black theology was speaking to our oppressors through the language of their engagement.
right.
I don't think Black folks have ever felt like we were convincing ourselves that God was pro our liberation, but we have had to convince white folks that we are fully human. And I think that
Mm,
was really the project of Black theology, was to argue for Black humanity through a language that white folks could engage with. And we see that come through so beautifully. And Black theology spurs civil rights movements. It spurs, we have amazing Black political philosophers, obviously Martin Luther King Jr. being one of the most well known among them. But
mm-hmm.
we see so many Black theologians. Perthea Hall, who helped spark one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, amazing Black woman theologian and pastor. So we see within the Black church a deep history of academia, political philosophy, organizing, and where the Black church, I think, has had deep stagnation has been around women's inclusion and LGBTQ inclusion. And
Mm,
so Black theology has done a phenomenal job speaking back to white supremacy, but has struggled to uplift Black women pastors, has struggled
mm.
to accept out Black queer pastors. And there's actually a really beautiful movie. I'm blanking on it right now. BET did it. Oh, For the Bible Tells Me So, I think.
Mm,
And it was all about all about queer communities in the Black church. And what really I think is heartbreaking is Black queer folks have spurred some of the biggest moments of revolution in the Black church. If we think about Bayard Rustin, who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s right hand man, who brought in the practice of nonviolence from India into Black church protest culture, who created the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which brought together Black pastors to organize for civil rights, but at times had to ride in the trunk of Martin Luther King Jr.'s car so that press wouldn't see him publicly and
wow.
associate Martin Luther King Jr. with his queerness. And so I
Mm,
think the Black church has done so much amazing work and has stopped short of uplifting the ingenuity and genius of Black queer and Black women pastors.
mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'll highlight is I did my research, which saved my life. My undergraduate research as a McNair scholar was called Dismantling Racial and Gender Barriers through the Examination of Black Women's Spirituality. And I interviewed a bunch of Black women pastors across the US, all who have their master's or PhD from Ivy League universities, about their experiences within Black Christian institutions. And the biggest thing we talked about was a lack of pay equity
Okay.
and the amount of women who were not hired because they were unmarried, which I thought was really interesting, and the amount of women who felt that Black men who had a bachelor's were hired over them, even though they, as Black women, had their master's and PhD. And so I try to remind folks ultimately when we talk about the church as a system, and we can do the same for white churches here, it is an institution. And so, a lot of, as a consultant, a lot of the same issues I see within secular workforces, sexism, pay inequity, a lack of accurate assessment of people's educational background comes into the church too. And I think we see that most clearly for Black women and queer folks in the church. But I want to honor its complicated, messy, nuanced, robust history that
Yeah.
the Black church has been an amazing site of activism and has been a difficult site, I think, of
Right.
reproducing harm as well. I have a question for you actually, which
Okay.
is, well, like,
Ask
what was
me.
the
Ask
theology of
away.
your upbringing, and how does it relate? Like, where do you maybe see some difference with how like Black theology is, and maybe the theology of your upbringing too, and what was that
Yeah.
like for you?
So I am passionate about it because, like, so I grew up in a very evangelical, like, around white people, did not have much diversity in my life. And it really wasn't until I just, like, wasn't around it, right? I was not around any type of diversity. And I've told my story before. I found out I was gay when I was like 16. I didn't come out
Mm,
till I was 35.
it's
Um,
beautiful.
but it was so one of the biggest turning points in my life was like through music, right? I would go to these studios in the projects and work with this one producer and on my music. And this one rapper, Takesha, she was like, "Hey, you should come to the studio and, like, you're a singer, like, be on some of my songs." So I was like, oh, okay. So I met her at the studio, and just through experiencing the music with people and just like getting to know people, and I don't know, it was just like it was truly a point in my life where I evolved from this like Republican, self-hating, homophobic like
Mm,
person to like starting to see other perspectives and like outside of this like white Christian American like worldview. And
mm,
it was truly through music that it opened my eyes, that I started doing like open mic nights and being in bands and like, just like seeing other perspectives. And then I dated a Black woman for like 8 years, and
oh wow.
just through her life experience
Mm-hmm.
and just learning about, I mean, it was just like, it opened my eyes to just so many things. Like her experience getting a job as opposed to my experience getting a job. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
her experience and how she's treated in workplaces as opposed to
yeah,
mine. And there were so many differences that um, was just so eye opening. And so that was
yeah.
part of my evolution and my consciousness of truly becoming the person I am today is, like you said earlier, when you start seeing things through other people's perspectives, it truly does, like, almost, it's like a salvation. It's like
Yeah.
you see outside of yourself, and you're able to realize like you don't have all the answers. Like,
Yeah.
that moment where you're like, oh, I might be wrong on literally everything I used to think.
Well, my
you
question,
know?
absolutely. Well, my follow-up question, because the first time I ever had really been around gay people was Berkeley. Like, I remember
Okay.
when I was like starting to crush on my like roommate, I was like, maybe I'll tip my toes in the LGBTQ center. And I remember it being like, this feels more like church than church. Like, I feel so
hmm
comfortable, it's so fun. So I'm curious for you, like being in that musician community, like for me, I had to experience God everywhere I was told God wasn't. Like the
Yes.
education part was part of it,
Yeah.
and I also had to experience it in my body. So I'm curious, like for you being around those folks, like
Yeah.
were the conversations different? Were the way that they engage with you different? Because for me, I just felt like this feels better than my church. It was like an embodied, like I don't know. I love being at the gay LGBTQ center, so I imagine being around gay musicians is like
Oh my
lit.
gosh. So you realize how much you suck.
I
when
feel
you're
you.
around Black singers and musicians. I mean,
Oh
like,
yeah, I can't imagine.
I was surrounded. I was so blessed. Like, God
Mm,
brought these people into my life. Like, I remember I was recording my first album, Naked Soul, and it was like a
so
soul pop
cool.
record that I wrote. And I was working with this producer, Ken Bell, and he is like this amazing creative genius. I mean, he produced that whole album. And the one day I was in the studio, and he's like, all right, Lauren, I brought some people in to work with you. And all of a sudden this girl, Bree, hits the like button. She's like, all right, Lauren, here's what we're going to do. And it was Bree, who's now like one of my very best friends, John and Bree, who are probably the most talented singers, I would say, in like top tier in the entire world.
Wow. So
So
cool.
I was blessed enough that God brought them in my path. It was kind of like this Wizard of Oz story where like the more I jumped into it, the more God would just bring these talented people in my life.
Mm,
And if it wasn't for them, that album would not exist. I mean, it
yeah.
would not be anything, right?
Yeah.
And so I just learned like, oh my gosh, like the talent, the heart, the I don't know, just the willingness to like be open to creativity, and
Mm,
those bonds that I created throughout that process just completely changed my life. You know, the
yeah.
friendships I formed, and I don't know, it's just those experiences that open you up, like I said, to different perspectives and music, and being on stage and seeing the different styles, and having that influence in your life of, you know, having background singers, and like I don't know, it's just like beautiful, being
Yeah.
able to experience music with people. So I don't know.
No, I love it. No, like
Yeah.
definitely you do know because that was brilliant. And like I think, it makes me think about it too, a couple of things, which is
Mm-hmm.
I love I've talked a lot about queer theology, which I definitely recommend your audience, take a look at queer theology. One of the seminal texts is called Our Lives Matter, a queer womanist theology.
Okay.
And the author, something she says is like, for queer folks, God is not just textual, God is experiential.
Mm.
And for most of us, like the biblical text, because it has been weaponized against us, like for me, I had to experience a different God to trust that a different God was real. And like, I think for some queer folks, like it's gonna be like, I love hearing your story because I feel like I just hear so much God in your musical experiences. And
Yeah.
even when I think about the Black church, the most visible queer person we often have in our Black churches are our choir directors. And it's not often addressed, but they are like the musical genius, the queer musical genius in the
Mm-hmm.
space. And I just, for me, it was in my garden, like experiencing, I had to experience the opposite of who I was told God was. So for me in my garden, it was realizing I could prune a plant wrong and plant things wrong. And like all this like perfectionistic fundamentalist theology died in my garden because I was terrible at it and it was still thriving. And it made me think a lot
Yeah.
differently about who God is. But I think a white fundamentalist God is often a very boundaried, rigid God. And I think
Right.
like a queer God and expansive God is found in our gardens. It's found in the music booth. It's found in community. And that's why I always say, like, for me, the
Amen.
best way to deconstruct is relationship. And
Amen.
I love hearing your story because I feel like God is all through it in those
A hundred
relationships,
percent. I mean, I truly believe that. Like, God, you find God through experiences. You
Mm-hmm.
change through relationship.
Mm,
God uses people to be your mirror to evolve you. And so
mm,
if you're not like creating relationships and putting yourself out there, it is hard to evolve, you know? And it is. It's like being more Christ-like is an evolution, and
mm,
you don't just like when people say like, well, you get saved then you change. I don't believe that. Like I mean, there is like a choice, but just like choosing to go like on a diet and be healthier, like that takes a long time,
mm.
right? So I don't know. I just feel like people who become Christian, just because you become a Christian doesn't mean you A, have all the answers, B, all of a sudden you're this good person, C, you can go around telling everybody what else to do. It is truly like a work that God does within your heart, that through people, through relationships,
Yes.
through evolving your mindset, through learning perspectives.
Mm,
I 100%, I'm on board with that. Like you said it so good, like it is through experiences, and that provides hope for people because
mm,
there is this, I think when most people write me, they are in a panic of this rigid white God who's like, you got to stay in these roles, otherwise you're going to hell. And that's
mm,
just all that's in their minds, is like this
mm,
one perspective of this angry God who hates their queerness.
mm,
And all these Christians are like validating that.
Yeah.
with all this hate. And so it's so hard to find that hope in that. Take a deep breath. Like, God is in so many different experiences and people, and like the evolution of our hearts in learning to love people. I was a Christian my whole life, and I was the biggest a-hole, angry bee, like self-projecting homophobic hate that you will ever meet. And it wasn't until I got into a relationship, that 8-year relationship, that God showed me my mirror and broke me down to the point where he was like, this is who you are, not who she is. And I said, okay, so this is how this feels to be, you know what I mean? To be treated like this. And I was like, it changed me completely.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get angry anymore. I'm patient. Like, I don't participate in like arguments. Like, I don't know. I just feel like God does use people to really show you your mirror. And that's a spiritual experience. And so like, I don't know, like what you were saying earlier about like, things that are like right and wrong, like you can say this is wrong 100% of the time, like, right? So most people would say like you being in a relationship with your girlfriend is wrong, but look at the fruits it like that came of it. Look at what I'm doing now, and looking at how I'm loving people and radically loving people. So was it bad, or did it produce, you know what I mean?
What are
good
the fruits? No, what are the
Yeah.
fruits? I mean, if
Yeah.
we're talking about, if we want to make it biblical, like what are the fruits of it? I think, oh my gosh, so much.
Exactly.
Oh God, there's so much. Oh, I love everything you said, and I
Yeah.
think, one, I love this idea of like, we talked a lot about having an evolving faith practice, which of all faith, whether we're any faith identity, right? Like it should be evolving over time. Just like, if we even take faith out of it, if you're an agnostic person or atheist person, you should still re-examine your values every few years. Who am I? What do I value? What do I? And that's what I
Yes.
see this as, us auditing our faith over time, right? It doesn't mean everything has to drastically change. Bringing it back to gardens a bit, like something I love about plants is like plants actually taught me that what you said about how Christianity is around this radical transformation. Nature shows me that's very rare. That something radically transforms that quickly. Like I love planting tomatoes, and tomatoes require a lot of pruning. They're very tenuous though. Like if you over prune them, they will not transform well. Like, and it's
Yeah.
actually a very small process. And it taught me that like transformation should be a very gentle, kind thing. That's why, like, even for folks as we talk throughout this pod today, like I want them to know like deconstruction can be a baby step. It can be challenging one idea that you were given theologically and just see how that feels. It can be a baby step. It can be this process of evolution. But even for myself, I can relate to you around the internalized homophobia and projecting that homophobia. Like, I grew up Assemblies of God, and I was taught to preach anti-gay ideas. And definitely when I was in my teenage years, I reflected on some conversations that I've had that I'm like, man, I can't believe I used to think that or say that or feel that.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was operating under this idea of like, this is God's mercy in practice. Now I know saying anything homophobic is not God's mercy, but I still have a value of mercy and grace. Just that value looks completely different, right?
Right.
In my mind back then, I contorted that into being mercy and grace to warn a queer person around their sin or warn a trans person around their sin. And now I know like that's dehumanization, and mercy and grace is, how do I create a better world for queer and trans people? How do I create a better world for myself as a queer person? And so I think what's so cool is our values can continue to expand, and they should. And
Yeah.
I had a video recently actually about how so many Christians will say they pray away the gay, and then I'm always like, are you just bisexual or pansexual? And what has been so fun for me about Christianity is like, I've discovered more about myself. I made myself into this binary small thing. And I think Christians, we all do this to ourselves. The Christian woman in an unhappy marriage that was told that suffering in this marriage is more important than her identity seeking. The young bisexual man who is hiding his identity because he's told compulsory heterosexuality is better than exploring his queerness. Like, we are all, even those of us who think we're benefiting from small theology, a lot of us are caged in it. And the
Yeah.
biggest cage is we're missing really cool parts of ourselves. Like
Yeah.
when I went to Berkeley, I didn't quite know that I would come out as like a lesbian and learn all these. I learned so much about myself, so much that I had prayed away so much more than my sexuality by praying away my queerness. I had
Yeah.
prayed away some of my joy. I had prayed away parts of my personality. I had repressed parts of myself that all came out when I deconstructed. And I think sometimes we talk about deconstruction only about what we'll lose, but I think in your story, I hear all the things you gained: a great partnership for almost a decade, a deeper way to navigate your anger and sadness and grief. That's
Right.
all gaining. That's all you gained. At least do you feel that way? Because that's what I hear is that you
Yeah.
gain something, in this
Yes.
process. So yeah,
I did. I gained a lot. And, that kind of brings up what I kind of want to talk about. Like you're kind of getting into the ex gay thing, right?
yeah, yeah.
And it is important because it kind of all boils down to this like black and white, can we or can't we type of vibe, right? And it's been on my heart because, I like I recently saw this creator post about being ex gay. And he was very like, you know, mocking, kind of like now that I'm ex gay, now he's mocking gay Christians. He's like making fun of, oh,
Mm,
you're in a monogamous gay loving relationship. Oh, you think that's okay?
mm,
Like, type that type of stuff. And but
mm,
what was so interesting about it, which I see time and time again, is he told this story about how he was in a relationship that he cheated on his partner and he couldn't be
mm.
monogamous, and he was doing alcohol and drugs, and he was self-proclaimed a horny guy going and sleeping around with all these people.
Yeah,
And so when he became a Christian, he related all that negative destructive behavior to being gay,
just cool. Yeah.
instead of, no, you just lacked self-discipline, lacked self-love, lacked respect for your partner. That had nothing to do with being gay.
Mm,
um
mm.
you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like, but these people are teaching people like, y'all, you better turn from it or you're going to go to hell. And
Mhm.
what we're talking about is like an more expansive God who is like, there's more than just this black and white version of, well, you either drop being gay and go to heaven, or or you're gay and you go to hell. So like, how can we come to
Mm.
terms with that?
With the nuance
Like,
of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how do we, because I know what I think. I mean, I'm very
Mm.
confident in it, but so many of my listeners are seeing this stuff. Kids are seeing these people say like, I'm telling you the truth and all this stuff. So I don't know, like our voices need to be louder than that and say
Oh,
like,
heck yeah.
God is in so like these experiences and in the evolution of your mind. And, it's more than just about not being gay or being gay. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
How I took it was, basically that we'll see a lot of ex-gay rhetoric online, and
Mm-hmm.
that rhetoric is not even just tied to sexuality, but other things like hypersexuality, or it's not just tied to people's queerness, but sin that they also kind of lump into their queerness. Like,
Correct.
and I think Christians do. Again, I think this one goes down back to, I mentioned nature and transformation, and I want to double down on that in the sense of, in Christianity, we have a confessional culture, testimony culture. You go up there and you talk about how you are past all of life's hardship. And we almost do it in a way where the person we were before faith is not integrated into who we are now.
Right.
That already, genuinely through a trauma informed lens, is not healthy. Like, we should not have a bifurcated self and a fissured and fractured self. And I do think, as I've mentioned, that a lot of our Christian theologies are disembodied, meaning they don't see the body as important, or pleasure or joy or bodily experience as important. It's often about conquering the body. And I think, number two, it means that we're missing just important information about what our bodies are telling us about God and who we are.
Mm.
I say all this to say, like, I think we have a mental health crisis in Christianity. So it makes sense
Oh
to
my
me that
gosh.
like, I think when people have this process where they go into faith, particularly because they are told that they need to transform their queerness,
Right.
and they're sharing their testimony online. I guess the first thing I want to caution listeners around is, I don't think that's coming from a healthy, well integrated person, period. When we think we can disembody a deep part of ourselves, particularly our sexuality, I think that is just emotional repression. So I
Mm.
want to caution listeners around maybe assigning wisdom or strength or resilience to the ability to deny oneself.
Wow.
And I think Christianity overall has said there is wisdom in that denial. And I think it's a perfect repression of who we are. We've learned to perfectly repress ourselves, but not letting that come forward isn't necessarily wisdom. It is just a separation of ourselves from who we are. So I think when a lot of Christians are saying, like, I have killed my sexuality and with it, I have killed all this other sin, I just don't think it's true. I don't think this is a person that is connected to who they are.
Mm,
When I first deconstructed, it was the first time I asked myself a lot of questions. When I first deconstructed, for example, I have a great relationship with my mother and my father, actually. But when I first deconstructed, it was the first time I ever processed the pain of my parents' divorce
mm,
because I felt like through Christian theology, I just learned to like forgive and bypass that, but never say like, "Hey, mom and dad, like that kind of sucked," and how that
yeah.
happened sucked. And my relationship with both them is better because I said it.
Yeah.
Before I deconstructed, I hadn't really processed the fact that my white church growing up was very anti-black. They put
Mm,
forward anti-black theologies. They said very terrible things about black communities, and I just accepted that. And then I felt deep rage after I deconstructed. And so I name
gotcha.
a list to say, in the acceptance of my sexuality, I actually found this kaleidoscope of emotions and self that I did not know, from anger to rage, things that I told were bad, things that I told were devoid of God that I needed to explore. And so it makes sense to me that for many ex-gay Christians, that when they repress their sexuality, they assign to it repressing other things. Maybe their anger and their rage and their envy is gone because it's all gone into the repressing box. I'm not convinced that it's been healed. I'm
Okay.
convinced it's all been collectively bypassed. So I think when I see an ex-gay Christian also saying, I've conquered this sin and I've conquered this sin, I've conquered that sin, I just think like you've gone into a portal where you are not interrogating your emotions or yourself anymore at all.
Gotcha.
Like the last thing I'll say, like for example, if I'm ex-gay right now and like I'm in a cafe and a girl comes in and I have a crush on her, I actually have to take. I remember this when I was a fundamentalist Christian, like having thoughts like this, like. I might spend 5 minutes in my head, like fighting down the thought that I think that woman is beautiful. Like, that's actually a lot of mental turmoil. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of Christians struggle with religious scrupulosity and stuff like that because they have turned against their own mind. So again, I don't think having to do the work of repressing who we are every day and ourselves every day is healing. I think it is spiritual bypassing, problematically repackaged as spiritual resilience or triumph. And
Wow.
I think it's a grift. I don't think it's truth. Now, I'm calling it a grift, not to call folks that do that grifter, because I think they believe that what they're saying is true. But I'm calling it a grift because it is not a sustainable practice. We see the evidence of conversion therapy. It just is not real clinically, but the impacts are real mental health wise, and that's what
Right.
concerns me the most.
Right.
Sorry, that was a lot, but I had to.
And these same people, no, that was perfect. Perfectly said. I 100% agree with exactly what you said because it's not realistic. Like I see it time and time again. These people, they come online, they start talking about being ex-gay and the approval, the comments, you know, everybody legitimizes what they're saying. Oh my gosh, yeah, the devil lost another one. And,
Yes. Oh
that
my
they
gosh.
get approval from these Christians and they love an ex-gay story because it just like, see, I told you LGBTQ people are mentally ill. And now that he came to Christ, blah, blah, blah. And, but at the end of the day, that approval can sustain them for a while, right? Because that feels good. We
Oh
can
yeah.
ride out life, repressing ourselves when everybody's telling us we're doing the right thing, right?
Come on.
We're doing the
Wow.
right thing, and we feel
Wow.
cozy and comfy, and we're fit in now into this white straight culture, that Christian, whatever evangelical culture, to fit into something that has been so against us. That's
Mm.
got to feel really good. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Oof.
But at the end of the day, after years, months, years go by and you're laying in your bed thinking about life, you know, you will come to face that moment when you're like, who am I and what am
Oof.
I doing in my life? What does all this actually mean? What fruit is this actually
Mm.
showing in my life? And is it possible to like have a balance where I can be free in both areas? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm.
True
Mm.
freedom is like being who you are fully and serving God in your
Oof.
fullness with you don't have to fake, like you're serving God as a fake self, as like an avatar of like who you aren't. And like,
Wow.
how much more powerful would it be if you could serve God in who you fully are and be authentically yourself in a healthy way that is mentally
Mm.
healthy, physically healthy, and that you're not just doing it to run from unhealthy behaviors. You actually are healthy and serving
Oof.
God. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my gosh. It's so funny. I'm trying to work on when I love hearing something. I have to vocalize about it, and I had to vocalize the whole time because that you ate that up. And like I really want your audience to know, like, I think like some of this is about deconstruction. I think some of this
Yeah.
is also just about how to live a healthy, integrated life as an adult
Yep.
person. And I truly think that Christianity does stunt a lot of us between 25 and 40, because a lot of the tools you need for adulthood are, I feel like, prayed out or spiritually
Wow.
bypassed Christianity. Sitting in the questions of our lives, sitting with grief, sitting when things don't go right. Christianity locates all of that in ourselves, in our behavior. And for me, that created a lot of neuroticism until I could deconstruct all of that. Like, it felt like my life was all correlation and causation. If I'm good, my life is good. If I'm a perfect Christian,
Yeah.
it's good. If it's bad, I did something bad and I need to go fix that. And
Yeah.
I just name all that in everything you're saying because I don't think that Christianity gives us the tools to live in the questions of our lives or to have good tolerance for uncertainty and mystery and see that God is there
Yeah.
too. Like, I'm currently reading The Four Vision Quests of Jesus. I highly recommend the book. And something he
Okay.
talks about is it's about indigenous perspectives of Christianity. And something he says is, within fundamentalist perspectives, Jesus getting tempted in the desert, all those things, it's all about moving towards certainty, proving the certainty of our faith. But in indigenous practice, it's really about going deeper into the mysteries, deeper into the questions. What does my
Wow.
sexuality mean? Does God love my sexuality? How do we serve God in a way that honors human dignity? Within fundamentalist faith, like, I was taught asking questions when I was a lukewarm Christian or having
Right.
revelations quoted at me, God will spit you out of God's mouth. All of this belief that God doesn't just hate or doesn't just dislike our questions, but our questions expel us from God. They're a sign of our lack of faithfulness. We become like Eve, kicked out of the garden. But I think so much of the reality of who God is in that wilderness.
Right.
Something I even say to folks is like, one reason Eve ate the apple and not Adam, in my opinion, is because the Garden of Eden was a paradise for Adam and not Eve. I think a lot of times marginalized folks, we are the ones that lead the questions because there's something that's not quite seeing us theologically. And like for Eve, it was, I feel like, this idea that, like, yeah, you can be in this garden forever, but you will be subservient to this man.
Yeah.
And I would also eat that apple to be like, is there another God outside?
Yeah.
Because I don't
Is
know
there
if I want
another
to do
garden I
that.
could chill in? Because this is not working for me.
Yeah, like, God says a garden, but we're literally in a wilderness in a forest.
Yeah.
And I think for many of us, like, God is in the forest. God is in the wilderness beyond, like, that whatever garden we were told is paradise. And I also think I think for a lot of Christians, yeah, we're taught to so much the original sin theology that curiosity is a portal into danger. Like, when I started to accept my sexuality, my fears, I can't even get into this mind state now, but I remember it wasn't even just about sin. Like, will I go to hell? It was like, will God still provide for me? Will I be physically safe? Will I be in danger? Like, Christianity, I think, does this thing to our minds where we feel like once we leave these thoughts and ideas, like, we are now vulnerable to the world. That's what I was told. Like,
Right.
if you accept yourself, you are vulnerable to the world. And I was given slippery slope theology, which is, if you accept your queerness, then you're really close to being a murderer. I mean, seriously, that's like how serious it is. Like, it's like
I know.
it's a slope between queerness and then you're gonna be on a murderous rampage. And so you also become like afraid that the deeper you go into self-acceptance, the more like something monstrous might come out of you. And like, what I found was the deeper I went into self-acceptance, actually, the better I could hold the nuances of others. I was most judgmental and I was
Yes.
least welcoming when I was
Amen.
most judgmental and least welcoming to
To myself.
myself. And having a more expansive theology has made me, I feel like, closer to Christian values. And I'm
Yeah.
curious what you think about that. And if you see that same thing, that slippery slope theology where it's like, if you accept this, then you'll accept, like, for queerness, I
Yeah.
think it's so specific. Like, if you accept this, then you accept this. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're better to others when we're better to ourselves.
Right.
But I'm curious your
No, I
thoughts.
mean, I remember I went on a mission trip once, and I mean, the missionary was asking me if I know how to, like, if I can, like, read minds, or like if I have like because lesbians are like witches or something. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, No, I never had that. Never had that happen. Like he was in, kind of like hinting that, well, like, let me see if she's can read minds or can do X,
Mm.
Y, Z. And it was very like a witchy, like trying to like say I'm a witch or something. I'm like, okay. And then, people in my comments all the time are like, well, you can't be an alcoholic and you can't be a drug addict, can you? Like, what does that have to do with,
Yeah.
like, you're comparing a destructive, harmful thing to just being in a loving
Being
relationship, being a
gay.
normal ass
They
person?
always do that. Yeah.
Why? It's like, so it's just silly stuff that I think common sense is missing in a lot of these things, where once you use like a logical comparison of like things that actually are harming, things that are actually destructive. Sexuality, can it be used for destructive and harmful things? Absolutely.
Mm.
But just because you have a sexual orientation, whether it be straight or gay, does not mean you're automatically lustful, automatically doing all these, horrible things, or you're promiscuous. Um,
And also, Lauren, let's talk about whose sexuality has been the most harmful. Patriarchal, violent men,
straight
like,
men.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
statistically, if you want to focus on something, focus on straight men. And if you want to protect children, that they are so adamant about protecting children against trans people, listen, start with straight men, honey, because the statistics say all kinds of proof is that that's where the problem lies. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but
No, absolutely. Even like I said, in Sodom and Gomorrah, if we take queerness out of it, it's men sexually assaulting people. Like that's what we see.
yeah,
That is the story.
I say that all the time because people will comment like, well, have you heard about Sodom and Gomorrah? And I'm
We've all
like,
heard.
do you know that, like, do you know, like, I have a question for you. Do you know the difference between rape and consensual sex?
Yes.
Because the only mention of anything having to do with, homosexuality was a gang rape attempt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's just like the more like logic you use, the more just like things are like, it's very easy to
Yeah.
just like talk about, how they're wrong about us, because it's just like use logic,
Mm.
use like common sense.
Absolutely.
So
No, definitely. But the church does teach you, it kind of trains you out of your common sense. Like
yeah.
for me, definitely what was most impactful about going to UC Berkeley, like, yes, falling in love with my roommate was lit. But the most impactful part, I think, was being in a community where the language of engagement was not Christian religion. Because,
Right.
like, when you're in that environment, it does trick you into thinking everyone thinks the way that your church thinks. And I think just like being at a school where I had a lot of agnostic and like I remember my first week I was like talking about Christianity and like some people were like, God is not real. And I remember being like, no one's ever said that to me. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, God's
Yeah.
not real. Like I was like, but then it became so freeing to be like there was something powerful, Lauren, for me at least, like seeing people live in what my church would say is sin, which was just like going to class on Friday, then maybe partying on weekends, maybe doing a little drugs. I did have friends that did drug stuff, but they were the most wonderful human being, had well-adjusted lives, wonderful
Yeah.
human beings, had wonderful relationships. A lot of them were healthier than my Christian friends who were
Mm-hmm.
not doing any of those sinful things, but were
Right.
not well mental health wise. So
Right.
one thing that I do think helped my deconstruction too was experiencing those that my church told me were living in sin who were actually more well adjusted than a lot of my Christian friends. Like that was very eye opening for me.
Right.
I don't know if you had any
Yeah.
experiences like that, but
Yeah. So no, I totally agree. It's
yeah.
individual, which is, like I said earlier, it doesn't make sense for like when people say like, well, once you're saved, God changes you. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying?
Yeah.
Because it's a process, and that has a lot to do with evolution of your mind, what you're exposed to, your education, what kind of relationships you're in, exposing yourself to different perspectives and points of view. And I mean, it's growth and evolution of your mind.
It
So,
is. Yeah.
so we have like 5 minutes before
Yes.
this runs out. I
Yeah.
mean, I could literally, this is like the longest episode because I feel like we could keep talking and talking
Oh,
about so
we
many
can do a
different
part two
things.
if you'd like, because
Literally.
I have a 12:45, which actually literally bummed me out. Because I could anyway. I would love to come back. I'm having a blast. I'm
Yeah.
just
I mean,
shooting
great
the breeze
conversation.
here.
But before we go, I just want to give you the opportunity. Like, what
Yeah.
is one message that you have for my
Mm,
audience? Like, one thing that you can leave them with, one word of
mm,
encouragement.
mm. Something I love about gardens is like plants. The research shows they respond best to positive affirmation. They respond best to
Mm,
positive, relating to
mm,
oneself positively. And I think we are taught that the most rigorous form of our faith is when we are being hardest on ourselves and hardest as others. And I find actually the most radical thing for us to embrace is a gentle God. And
wow.
so I just want to encourage your audience to consider like what does a gentle God look like, and a God in their gentlest form teach you about who you are and who others are too. And I think that's where we get a little closer to theological truth. As I'm reticent to claim a truth, but I think that's what I want to encourage your audience to think about: is who is a gentle God, and what does a gentle God offer us, and who benefits from a punishing God.
Mm,
Because I think those are the things I'm thinking about right now.
wow.
So I definitely want to invite that. And I want to invite your audience to get out inside this week, get into a little nature, get into the soil. It is gardening season, which
Yes.
people do. I live in California, so I want to clarify. I don't mean marijuana. I do mean a little garden.
Okay.
I know gardening is what people also say online for marijuana.
Oh,
That
okay.
is
I
great,
didn't
but
know
I mean
that.
a literal garden.
Got you.
I always get messages like, "Are you the gardening theologian or are you the gardening theologian?" So I'm like, I do live in the
Gotcha.
Bay Area, but I mean a literal garden. So please get in there, and then follow me on socials, the Gardening Theologian on TikTok, Substack. I have a podcast, the Community Garden Podcast. So check us out, and other things too that I can't think of. But I would love to
Perfect.
connect with you all more.
And we will put all of her, social handles below.
Thank you,
Now,
thank you.
Ciarra, do you mind if we say a quick prayer together?
Please, oh my God, yes, that would really
All
bless
right,
me.
let's do
Thank
it.
you. Yes.
So, God, I just thank you so much for this amazing conversation that you have created, Ciarra, with such a
Hmm.
wisdom and just passion for education and truth and just approaching people with empathy and compassion and different perspectives.
Hmm.
God, I just pray that you would expand her ministry, that you would just give her so much more wisdom, that you would expand her audience, expand the people she works with, so that people can truly learn that you are an expansive God and that we can know you more through your mystery and your divine mystery, your divine love, your radical love, and through the experience of knowing others and seeing, how compassionate we can be. So, God, bless her, bless our audience today, and anybody, I pray that they would be able to take from this episode and just know that they are loved. And like Ciarra said, get to know the gentle God that is
Hmm.
not out to harm us, not out to
Hmm.
send us to hell, but who wants us and who knows that we are his children and who wants to, like a garden,
Hmm.
gently, you know, refine us and perfectly mold us into who we are so that we can thrive and so that we can be our best selves in this lifetime. So, with that said, I just pray a blessing on everyone listening. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Oh, I really needed that. I didn't even know I needed that. So thank you. That really this whole podcast blessed me.
Mm,
Like this was the best part of my day.
thank
I'm
you.
very honored. Like you guys are killing it.
I
This is great.
appreciate it. Well, Ciarra, thanks for joining us on You Can Be Both. And for everybody listening, until next Sunday at 11 a.m., I want you to remember I love you, God loves you, and you have a
Hmm.
whole community that loves you. Bye, guys. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here today. If this episode resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Make sure you share it with somebody who needs the reminder that they can be both. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss future conversations. Your subscriptions, likes, and shares genuinely help us out to reach people who are still struggling and suffering in silence. Now, if you're looking for deeper healing resources, my LGBTQ healing and resource guide is linked below. It includes my full story, the exact books, podcasts, and voices that help me move from shame to freedom. Now, if you want to hear more of my journey through music, you can find all my songs under Lauren Lanzaretta on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. And I want you guys to remember, you are not confused. You are not broken. You are not too much. You can be both. All right, I'll see you next time.